Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I rise to support this motion, a sensible motion brought by the Honourable Trevor Khan. Note that in doing so, the motion only calls for further discussion on the issue of increasing speed limits on the two roads he has nominated. I'd also suggest that he would include the Hume Highway from Sydney to, or probably from Campbelltown to the Victorian border, but probably all the way to Melbourne, because what an amazing piece of infrastructure that highway is now, with separated carriageways and bypasses of townships along the way, that now it's an incredibly safe piece of road infrastructure. And having driven to Melbourne many a time, and particularly down to Albury, I can see the frustration of the motorists that as they go past police radars under overpass bridges, monitoring the traffic, everyone's sticking to 110 kilometres an hour when the road infrastructure clearly can support higher speed. And 120 to me seems a sensible speed for those freeways and motorways like that. And when I talk about the road infrastructure which has been built in Australia over the last 20 or 30 years, it's a big cry from the old Pacific Highway or the old Hume Highway in terms of winding roads with passing lanes, highways with passing lanes and sharp curves and steep hills. And when I remember as a kid always passing broken down trucks and cars on the Hume Highway when we used to go up to Bellingen for our holidays, that's a far cry from today, where we have separated carriageway, we have the cable system that is on the stretches where cars can go off the road to restrain them, and that's saved a lot of lives. The sharp bends and curves are removed under modern engineering. Crossroads are flyovers or underpasses, and as I said before, townships are bypassed. The great amenity improvement to the townships like Albury, like Goulburn, where the main streets become, after some adjustment, flourishing centres without having the trucks going through at the middle of the night and the traffic pouring through, frustrated to get through the towns. I'm reminded of my driving in Denmark. Now, Denmark's much smaller country, so they obviously don't have as much infrastructure to have to invest money in, but they have a pretty impressive freeway highway system, and they did have an open autobahn type speed limit system in Denmark, but they have reduced it to 130 on sections where 130 can be sustained. Well, that's a difference from open speed to 130. And of course Europe's much more connected now, because there are now bridges connecting Denmark into Europe as opposed to rail connections on train, on amazing bridges, incredible bridges. But it's 130, and there's some ideas there which I'd actually like to bring to the attention of the Honourable Duncan Gay at another time, but things like trucks restricted to one lane only during peak hour, so that the cars can get through at high speed, because in Denmark trucks are restricted to, I think, 90 kilometres an hour, certain heavy trucks. So they certainly have the safety and speed issue balanced, I think, quite well. But what I do think we should look at, if we look at this idea, is the variable sign system. You know, the signs that change speed, and I think they're on the freeway down to Wollongong, based on the weather elements. So if it's wet, the speed limit goes down, because vehicles react differently in the wet, and drivers react differently in the wet. And of course also city drivers on these big freeways react differently in the wet to what people used to driving in the country react. And indeed the variable sign limit could be applied when there's increased traffic, like at Christmas or Easter, where there's more chance of an accident because there's a lot less experience for drivers on the road. You could drop it down to 110 or 100 at that time to manage the traffic flows. And that's the systems we're coming to in the future, with satellite technology, speed limits indicated into your cars, which is already available. You know, the technology is going to make making roads safer, and indeed, you know, leading the way are car manufacturers and government with roads. And the safety advances are incredible. And of course, you know, it's not that far away that Google cars, driverless cars, will be on these roads. Already you have model vehicles that have radar. I know there's a Mercedes that I was in that hits the brakes automatically. It scares me. It's a good liberal Mercedes. Just for the record, I don't. Just for the record, I acknowledge that interjection saying I own a Mercedes. My partner wishes. Just for the record, I don't own a motor car.
Oh.
Right? I use Go Get. I ride a bicycle. I use public transport. Now, I'm probably more sustainable than the Greens and the Labor Party. Let me tell you, I don't have a parking spot in Parliament either. So let me just tell you, it's the Prime Minister and I both are big public transport fans. So I'm not speaking from owning a car. And in fact, I'm using a Go Get car on the weekend to go to Wollongong for a function. So I'm trying to be as sustainable and appropriate as all members should be. But it's easier for me being living in the inner city and not in a country or remote area, I do admit that. But vehicles are much safer. Brakes, airbags, technology, as I just described. And you might, the Honourable Mr Mookie might make a joke about a Mercedes, but we know that the technology in a Mercedes today is in Holdens and Toyotas tomorrow.
Yeah. I'd be in Holdens.
It transitions very quickly into other vehicles. And airbags, seatbelts, all those things. Volvo, remember, Volvo put the seatbelts in, and it went from Volvo to the other cars.
And the hat on the back.
And dare I say, the private sector led those safety developments as the market did that. I do share the concern about heavy vehicles, and particularly for city drivers, inexperienced and driving with heavy vehicles, and that would mean they probably don't drive an M5, which you get used to heavy vehicles there, because they can be intimidating, even if not intentionally meant to be going past a B double, and you're usually just driving down. When you're just driving down King Street, Newtown, normally, and so there may need to be some driver education awareness, and that brings me to the point that I'm of the view that all drivers should be required to do refreshers about driving.
I thought you were a libertarian.
I'm not a libertarian. Every 5 or 10 years, because and particularly as we
what about older drivers? I want to get on the record. Particularly
as we head towards this notion of freeways and increasing the speeds, because tragically, and I'm not making light of this, tragically, because my folks live in Dubbo and family in western New South Wales, most of the fatalities are usually associated with an inexperienced driver, probably a city driver in the country, and making a mistake on the road. And one of the things I was taught as a kid in the bush a lot was never swerve to miss a kangaroo or flock of galahs. And because that's when that's right. There's plenty of glass here. That's a high statistical likelihood of a fatality. The other thing that I am concerned about is young drivers, and they have limitations in their speeds now, but we know they're massively overrepresented in the statistics. So if we talk about having roads at 120 kilometres an hour, we don't want young drivers going out there at night to make it their speedway, so we have to manage that. But technology will be our friend there. So with those few words, I'd like you to add the Hume Highway to that, because I think now that it's been completed, and it really was. I drove from Melbourne to Sydney. I love the country drives, and I drove from Melbourne to Sydney about 2 years ago. And it was one of the most amazing pieces of infrastructure construction you would see. But it was unsung in this nation what was going on, creating a dual freeway. There was, they had those huge construction yards and sites, and there was just 100 kilometres, 200 kilometres of those, and there was like 40 or 50 different locations, and huge investment in our country's infrastructure and huge engineering feat. So it was amazing. So that road, in my view, is global standard, and it could certainly be 120 kilometres, and my idea of variable signs to deal with the conditions. So with those few words, I commend the motion to the House.